Mr. President, I want to join my colleagues, the two that just were here, spoke as I was here, my friend from Montana and my friend from Oklahoma, to talk about really the uniqueness of the government we have, the unbelievable coming together of ideas in Philadelphia in 1787, ideas, frankly, that nobody ever had thought of in quite the same way before, starting with the first three words. This is the only document ever devised up until that time that suggested that the source of government was the source of government that the Constitution recognizes immediately. When the Magna Carta talked about the relationship between the king and the barons of England, and that was even a big step in a new direction, because up until then, under monarchies, there was only one source of government, which was God, and God's ordained, chosen monarch was viewed by country after country after country as the way this should be done, and there would be a succession, and it would be understood, and had really nothing to do with you or me or anybody else. It was all some greater plan left up to somebody else. The Articles of Confederation that Mr. Langford mentioned as a weak form of government that just simply after a little more than a decade had proven not to work. It just was not a workable structure, but it looked to the states. It was sort of, we, the states of the United States, enter into this agreement as states, but it was the Constitution that came up with this brand new concept that was put in paper, at least for the first time, we the people. The people become in 1787, and in reality, when the Constitution is adopted and the government's formed in 1789, the people become the source of government. The people become the responsible party. The people become the party that if the government isn't doing what you want it to do, it's up to you to do something about it, because the government's only there because of you. Now, was we the people a totally inclusive, perfect document or even a perfect idea in 1787? Not at all. In fact, the Constitution goes on to say we're doing this to form a more perfect union. They don't even suggest we're forming a perfect union. They just suggest we're forming a more perfect union, understanding that even within their range of vision of what might happen, and there were people there advocating that women be able to vote, as Abigail Adams had during the Revolution itself. There were people advocating that slavery be ended. All of those things there were many things that were evidence in that room as part of the debate that didn't happen, but they didn't wait to have a perfect union. They said, we're going to form a more perfect union, and you've got to believe in that. They assumed it would get more perfect as time went on. And here we are, 200 and some years later. Is it perfect yet? No. But it's hopefully more perfect than it has been, and less perfect than it will be, because we, the people, we're going to come together in this convention and then later adopt it in a bigger setting to form a more perfect union. And that more perfect union would include ideas that nobody had ever thought about before. If the people are forming the government, what kind of controls do you put on the government? Not too many controls. I remember in the bicentennial of the Constitution, Warren Burger was the chairman of the Bicentennial Commission, the Chief Justice of the United States, and he said when he was a boy that you measured the value of a horse by how little harness you could put on it and still get it to do the work you wanted done. You didn't totally handicap the horse by piling all kinds of harness and all kinds of reins and all kinds of bits. The valuable horse was a horse that didn't need to take all kinds of structure, but had all the structure it needed. And that's what the Constitution tried to put together. Not a government that would overwhelm itself, but a government that had enough to control itself. And so they came up with this idea of balance of power. They started describing, as all of us would believe, the most important part of the government in Article 1. That's why it was Article 1 that set up the Congress, the House, and the Senate. They then came up with an executive that would execute the will of the Article 1 body, the body that would decide how to spend the money, and the body that would decide what laws could get on the president's desk, and the body that had the ability, if the president didn't sign the law, to override the president's decision not to sign the law. All of that was there, but that balance of power where the Congress had strengths, the executive had strengths, and even the court comes in to serve often as a referee between the two, sometimes to tell the president what the president can do and the Congress can't do, and sometimes just the opposite, to say, no, you can do this, you can appropriate the money, but you can't appropriate it conditionally. You can't appropriate the money and say to get the money, the president has to do things that don't have anything to do with the appropriations process, but we just want the president to behave differently. We can't do that. The president shouldn't be able to do it either, and the courts are often the group that decides that. And again, not hanging too many obligations in the Constitution. What's the Constitution say about the courts? Not a lot. It says there'll be a Supreme Court and such other courts as the Congress decides necessary. That's not a very complex structure. Doesn't say how many people are going to be on the Supreme Court, and there have been different numbers over time. Doesn't say how many other courts there'll be, but the courts are there, and the judges serve for life, outside of the normal concerns that they might have that one of the other groups would decide whether they could continue to serve or not. That may be their greatest power, that they're there no matter what they decide unless their decision is so extraordinary that somehow the other power decides to remove them. And so here we are, this is a living document, it's amendable. It's a living document through its amendments, not through its interpretation. The founders, nor those who believe the Constitution continues to serve a constitutional purpose, never thought that, well, the Constitution, we'll decide later what the founders would have thought that sentence meant. This has divided our country, by the way, for a while, but many people, along with me, think the Constitution means what it says it means and what you would have thought it would mean in the context of the time. And if you want to change that, there's a process to change it. The amendment process works just beyond just the first 10 amendments and the other amendments that Senator Langford talked about, and it's still there to do that. But here we are, celebrating this unique moment where people came together with ideas that got on paper and were approved, that even if they'd been talked about before, had never formed the basis for a government before. And here we are, well over 200 years beyond 1787 and the first year of the government, 1789, and that Constitution's been the model for all kinds of constitutions by all kinds of countries. Interestingly, many of them have almost the same Constitution we have. They just have not been able to figure out how to live with it or to let the balance of power and the power of people work. Again, the most important part, the first three words, the most important understanding to form a more perfect union, not yet accomplished, maybe never accomplished, but it always gives us a goal for things to be better than they have been in the country we have the opportunity to live in under the Constitution that provides a unique set of liberties and freedoms that others can only hope for.